Boom. There, I clicked the button. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. I hope you are all well. This week, we have the developer best known as Oak, uh, which you are a game developer, programmer. I asked for your preferred technical titles, and I've been given Tech Wizard and Brain Farter Extraordinaire. So you're going to have to explain that for us a little bit. But you have worked on titles such as Might and Magic Heroes 7, Disco Elysium, and what I recently played, Death and Taxes. So welcome to the show, and please justify yourself now.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. It's very cool to be here. Very excited to see where this is going. But yeah, so the reason for the job title is mostly because it's really hard to nail down my specialties at this point. Just because I've had the chance, and in some cases also the privilege, to work on some very interesting projects, interesting in various reasons. And I've had to do a lot of different things on those projects. Mm-hmm. Like, I started out as a programmer when I was basically, my first bigger project that I was working on professionally in games that I got money for was Might and Magic Hero 7. So I started doing coding there, but I didn't really limit myself to that, and I really mean that part, because what I mean is that I wanted to learn about literally every aspect of game development, meaning design, level design, audio, business, even the different layers of programming, like network, engine, etc. So I would just push myself into meetings with other people, and whenever I would hear oh, there's an interesting meeting going on about narrative design, it's can I join there? And my bosses would be like, sure, okay, whatever, you can sit in the corner and listen and yeah, whatever. So that's kind of where it all started. And after I had kind of left the AAA part of the gaming world, then I started being an indie, and that requires you to wear a lot of hats. Mm-hmm. So especially during Disco Elysium, I was doing so many different things. I was doing production, I was doing a little bit of public, not necessarily public relations, but outside relations with partners. I was doing a lot of different kinds of things from different aspects, and also programming, and also leading some people. So yeah, a lot of aspects that needed to be covered, and some also needing to be kind of good at them. Right. So that's kind of where that comes from. So when I kind of just became a problem solver, so you could just throw a problem my way and I would try and fix it. And that started with being in the AAA part, and then definitely carried on into the indie experience.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital. It's almost necessity in the indie world to have that broad set of talents, and more importantly, the broad set of interests or passion to pursue all the different avenues in game dev in order to successfully complete a project. But it is also super fascinating to hear you doing that in the AAA world, because when I think of the AAA world, which is admittedly I have very, very little experience in, I often assume everybody is 100% a specialist. You're the guy that makes the grass. You're the guy that puts the trees in the place, and you're the guy that makes people walk in the right direction, right? Did you find in your experience trying to push it, or broaden your horizons within the AAA industry, was there much pushback against it or trying to box you in, or was it encouraging? Being in I guess a more junior role or early role to grow those skills?
I mean, in this particular case, so we were on the lower end of the AAA spectrum, but still Heroes of Might and Magic, very long time, well beloved series all across the world, and it was a good large production, basically. And the company was hired as a third-party developer for it, Limbic Entertainment. They weren't necessarily a big company at the time. Like they were hiring like crazy because they got this project, right? So I was one of those people who came in with a wave, basically. I think I was like the 12th or 13th person on the team,
Right.
and we ended up being like in total with like a lot of other people, like many times that amount. So yeah, it took a lot of people to get things happening, and the fact that it started quite small left me a lot of open doors. So it was mostly like the situation itself. Like everybody wanted me to focus on programming, obviously,
Right.
because that's kind of what you want to do. You want people to specialize. But I just wanted to get like a clearer picture of the entire project at like any given time. And eventually, uh, there was there was a little bit of pushback in the beginning, but later on people just started accepting me as like if I just showed up at a meeting, then it wasn't really like news anymore, right?
Hmm.
I kind of went there, and I also did earn my place there, and I was given the chance to do that. So it was just a lot of passion and a lot of time that I put into it, and people could just see like I'm not gonna let this go. So it's probably easier to take a chance and let him do his own thing. So there was encouragement eventually for that as well. And that helped me out a lot in the project, actually, because like for example, when it came to any sort of like people were asking about how something works in the game. It's like, oh, do you remember how this thing works, or do you remember like how we implemented that thing? And people who could just ask me, and most times I would at least know to how to tell them to like where to look
Hmm.
to like figure out the problem. So I kind of became this like walking talking encyclopedia a little bit as well, which was stressful because it felt like a lot of information to juggle, but at the same time, it was super fun because I could help out a lot.
Right.
People could like ask me questions, and I would have the answers to them, just like making things smoother. And eventually, a lot of other people also started getting into that, so that they would have like a more wider picture. And I think that actually helped out a lot, especially since like the team wasn't the biggest in the world.
Right. I've heard very frequently and do agree that it is super important for directors and creative directors to have that interdepartmental knowledge, right? You have that knowledge base so you can have good communications. But um, from what I'd assumed was that the communications between departments in a AAA, and again, I mean, this is your case is probably different from the majority, but is very isolated. Going almost exclusively through department heads or section heads. So I'm curious how you found the interdepartmental communications, having acquired all the additional information and knowledge about the project across all its disciplines.
Like as it is usual with like bigger productions, there's usually like exactly these kinds of like points of contact that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, not a lot of overlap there in communication with other people, but in the sense of in my day-to-day work, I eventually did start talking to a lot of different departments, like naturally, just because of the tasks I was doing. I ended up doing stuff for I did AI stuff. I did like scripted cutscene stuff a little bit. I did a lot of like gameplay side logic, so I was always involved with like QA quite a lot, the design department, production to like do estimations, and then I don't know, level design as well to make sure that scripting works and if there's like any sort of hiccups there, even though I wasn't necessarily responsible for that exactly. But it was if you're in that kind of environment, and we also had like some people who were naturally like doing two things kind of at the same time in the office as well, then you could have this like interdepartmental overlap quite a lot. And I'm not a big fan of that. Like, as I moved forward to other projects, then it was definitely more of like an open thing where everybody is talking to everybody regardless of what they're doing, and the clicking, so to speak, like happens in a completely different way, not in like the departmental sense. And
Right.
that was interesting to observe as well. And I think that's very, very common in indie productions, especially since you can have that overlap, and it's always really helpful if all the people on like an indie project are like really, really into it. like it's kind of like treating it like everybody's baby. I love when that happens.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned that they're like when you have a more flat structure, clicking still happens. I've heard of this happening at big
Yeah.
studios with flat structure like Valve. It's pretty a common story to come out of there. Um, but it makes sense because I think people only have capacity to retain communications with X number of people. You know, it's
Yeah.
really hard to talk to an entire 100 person, 200 person team and have quality communications or valuable communications across it. So, given that, having seen both sides of it, do you think that AAA is isolating its people properly in these specialized groups, or do you think it works better when the people self isolate with their own cliques?
I would think that the self isolation eventually works better, because I think like a lot of times this sort of like department structure is a little bit too artificial. I've heard from other like industry colleagues that kind of like similar notions that like if you go and do your specialist job at a specialist department and do that forever and you don't have anybody really that you can connect to, you're gonna feel miserable.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what happened to a couple of my friends, and they hate it. That's kind of the thing. And like there's this kind of I don't know, like default relation score with other departments as well. That's like when you get into it, then it's like, oh, it's kind of okay to talk with that department, but it's maybe not that like socially acceptable to talk to that other department. And I find that so mind-bogglingly strange,
Right.
that there's this like unspoken rules, kind of like who are you supposed to talk to as well. And I love when people don't do that. Like for example, uh, in Limbic, we had a really cool like accountant, basically
Mm-hmm.
secretary type of person, office manager in the office, and she was talking to everybody, and she was like didn't really know what this game making thing was or whatever necessarily, but she kind of got the picture, and she was always super interested in like what everybody was doing, and that felt like super interesting and very, very cool, because like from my previous experience, like from some odd jobs like programming or doing internships or whatever, like that necessarily wasn't the case. That you
Mm-hmm.
just like have this free of like communication between like wildly different departments. So I think like this, if you can choose yourself naturally how you mesh with other people, then that's kind of also that's what builds a good team. And like that makes a lot more sense to kind of keep structure there, and it's gonna make things easier for management as well. So yeah, if you have these like ragtag teams that mesh well, like, and that they're doing work with a certain producer, then that's it. It's like you pair up the people who work well with the producer who works well with them, for example, and that just makes things work real smooth.
Right, right, right. As it's interesting that you mentioned the office manager example because it calls to mind so many times. I used to be a game journalist a long, long time ago, and
Yeah,
very, very frequently I'd talk to marketing heads or they're like, even product directors or product managers who truly knew nothing about the game at its core, who knew nothing about the fundamentals of what this was, what the developers and designers were trying to express with it. um
yeah,
and that I think comes from that everybody in their box, everybody in their place. These guys only focus on the spreadsheets with the numbers and the sales figures, and these guys focus on the game, and never the two shall cross. And I think you've got a good example of like how grouping people in different fashions can do really well. But I'm also curious how you think that. Do you think is it a positive benefit to productivity? I mean, the bottom line and the most important thing of all, of course, is productivity. Never mind happiness. But
Yeah, no.
does it do as well? I mean, there's a reason the AAA does things this way.
Yeah, the reason AAA does a lot of things is because they've been done before, and that's not necessarily the thing that's going to work. And they can only do some things as they do because they have such like they have the margin to do that. Like they just need our results. Like they
Right.
just need something, and that's okay. Like a lot of AAA studios don't like kind of throw this out of the window as well. I guess Bungie would be a good example. Like that's usually the one people like to bring out. But I mean, there's definitely, I would say, an impact in. I don't necessarily know if productivity is like the thing that skyrockets. I would say that naturally, yeah, it does actually improve. But I think what improves is just the level of communication and transparency, which gives a lot of people more security. And it feels more, for lack of a better word, cozy to work in that kind of environment because you have no reason to be paranoid. You don't have any reason to kind of like start freaking out about what other departments are doing and if they're gonna deliver. If you have this kind of loosely connected like network of people, then everybody is going to be more in line with what everybody else is doing. And also, if they're not being forced into a kind of like a group that they don't like, then they are going to be happier and more fulfilled. And that's already like way more important because that's good for motivation generally.
Right.
Like for me as well, like I've felt this very, very, very like first-handedly. It really makes things, yeah, as I said before, so much smoother if you're just with a group of people that you get along with and you can meme around with and just have a good old time, and also do work with them
Mm-hmm.
like daily, day to day. It feels good.
It does get a lot harder to point fingers at a department when things go wrong, though. So I don't know if it's ever going to work, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's like mistakes specifically in these kinds of situations are great as well, mostly because I find that people are going to get exactly into this problem that it's hard to point a finger,
Mm-hmm.
and people like kind of naturally start taking collective responsibility. And it's much easier, I think, in those moments to kind of come forward and say like, yeah, hey, like last week sucked, like I'm not gonna lie. And then we just take it from there. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, so I guess it sucked, yeah, but like let's see what we can do with it and how we can go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that when there's mistakes in AAA spaces, or like I would say like in more corporate type of like hard hierarchy type structures, then it's always people like sweating beads, thinking like, oh crap, what's gonna happen next? Like, did I fuck up? Is my head on the block? Am I gonna have to like? Am I gonna get fired for this or whatever?
Right.
Those kinds of like emotions. Even though like they're probably like management probably isn't even thinking like that, but that's what the person might feel like, because like that was like you had one job literally.
Right.
Then you screw that up and you're like, fuck. And then it becomes really difficult like personally to kind of process. That's like from my experience at least.
Right. So that was at Limbic, you said. What happened? Where did your career take you after that? You went into disco.
Yeah, so I tried a little bit of like solo dev
Hmm.
with a friend. I would like not solo dev, sorry.
Solo dev
Like
with a friend, yes. Not even a joke. Really common in the indie space.
I
Solo
know,
dev with a
I
friend.
know. But like basically so my friend and I started a company, and we were just thinking like let's just make some games together, like kind of as a joke. It
Hmm.
literally started out as a joke. We were just hanging out like at a house party at a like yeah, just knew each other for a long time, but hadn't hung out for a while, and then we just met up at this party, and we were just saying like, "Oh yeah, like oh unemployed by the way," and we're like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna leave my job real soon," and then we just kind of started talking. It's like, how oh, we should make games together then, like, and then we're like a few weeks later, we were like asking each other like, "Were you serious?" Like because I don't know if I was being serious, and then
Right.
it kind of went there, and then we made a pretty cool mobile game that we really adore ourselves, and my dad really likes it for some reason. It's a very simple, like kind of casual puzzle game, and then we started making a very interesting mashup of like Doom and Diablo. So basically,
Okay.
hack and slash first person style, like kind of thinking like Hexen or whatever, but
Hmm.
with like loot mechanics basically and replayability. And then we did that, even managed to get like, I think we had like 13 people on our team at any given time, and people were just doing this voluntarily. And then it kind of all fell apart. Then I was moving from Germany back into Estonia. So Limbic was in Germany. And then yeah, everything kind of went haywire in my life. Didn't have a job, lost my relationship, didn't have a place to live, so I crashed with my
Good
grandmother.
times. Good
Like
times.
knee deep in debt into like got a loan from my sister, so like didn't really have any like good connections with friends at the time, so it was like real proper shit show. And then I eventually found Zaum. Or actually, that was the first time I had talked to them. They had asked me like repeatedly to work on Disco Elysium, like many times, and I had like gone to their place and said hi and hung out and just talked to the people because I had some friends working there and some people I had known from my past. And then at that point, it was like, yeah, okay, that seems like a logical choice. So I just offered myself to do like whatever they needed to do, and then basically went on from there.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Indie games, tend to have that effect on people, man. Uh,
Yeah,
it's interesting. Like it's hard. It's hard to make a go of doing solo dev with a friend or even 13 people. Um, but
yeah.
it's tough. Were you when the time came? Did you feel ready to jump back into a workplace existence on Disco, or was it
Yeah,
was it pure necessity?
it was kind of both. Like I didn't know what I was gonna do with my life at that point, and I was just desperate to focus on anything. And that anything happened to be awesome,
Right. Yeah.
basically. Yeah, so it was definitely born out of necessity because I kind of made a promise for myself that I would not work in any other industry than the games industry.
Okay.
When I like it was a year or so or year and a half into like Heroes of Might and Magic 7, and then I tried to keep that promise, like at least for the time being. Like it was important to me, so because I just felt like I had so much more to learn, and I'm really interested in just like absorbing all the knowledge about like how games work, what do they do with the brain, like how are they affecting people, and all this kind of stuff like that. And then I saw what Disco Elysium was kind of shaping up to be, and then I just figured like, damn, like it hit hard because that game is so relatable in so many levels. It was just extremely easy to connect with a project and put myself into it. And that's kind of what I want all of my projects to feel like. I had that with Hero 7.
Mhm.
I kind of had that with Tropico 6, which came after Hero 7 in Limbic. But I had that again with Disco Elysium. Like, I was really into it. And then
Right.
again with Death and Taxes. Like, now that's kind of what I want to work on. I want it to be very, very passionate. That's kind of the key word here. I need it to be.
It's very interesting to hear the proclamation to self. I will only work in games. Did you? Because I've seen the industry and indie even and AAA kick the shit out of some really good people, and they've left. They've gone off,
Yeah.
to, and they have not once looked back. They've been like, holy crap! It's so much easier just living a normal life and not dealing with games at all. Um, did were there moments where you thought maybe I'm going to have to turn my back on this passion?
Yeah, at one point, yeah, I was willing to give it up. But I would say like I would have still found a way
Mm,
to do it, even if it wasn't full time. So at one point, I did kind of like was going to make the leave, and then I had a massive breakdown. I was gonna go like earlier back into Estonia, and then also work like go back to my previous job at the university that I studied in. Like before I went into games, I was teaching in a uni while I was studying it in it as well.
mhm.
Uh, I got along really well with the dean, so yeah, that helped. So yeah, I had those moments where I just thought like, okay, it's just not gonna work out, and it's gonna be fine. But yeah, like things didn't really go that way for various different reasons. And when I did tell that to myself, then I just felt like, uh, how do I even put it? Like it was something that I felt like a mighty need for. It was really hard to say no to. So I just wanted to go with my gut in that moment, and I I wouldn't have wanted to like trade any of the game industry experiences that I had for anything at that point. So yeah, I just found it really important to at least keep exploring as much as possible. If I have the chance for it, I'll try it. If I don't, I'll try and create that chance for myself because I felt so strongly about it.
Right. So, life's kicking you around pretty hard. You have this big test of faith moment. You offer yourself up to the god of Disco Elysium,
Yeah.
enter the team, enter the project. What happens? What happens next? What do you do?
Well, at first, I'm basically doing programming there, whatever is like necessary, and then like the people kind of joked around there. It's when I arrived because I was only like one of two people working there at that time who had shipped a game before, so it was an atmosphere of celebration, which was very nice. I felt very welcomed, but at the same time, I felt really weird because, as I just said, like I felt like I just have so much to learn, and then there are people
Right.
who are like, "How to make games?" I'm like, I don't fucking know. So I'm just trying to like imposter syndrome myself like through it or whatever. Okay, like uh, I didn't have an imposter syndrome. I just felt like if I ever let that happen, then I would fall apart. So I just tried doing the rational thing and just be confident and like try and learn, like keep on learning, like allow myself to make mistakes and keep on learning. So as time went on, I started taking more and more hats and basically started doing more and more different things again because I was in an environment where that was allowed and even encouraged. So I started doing overtime. Like, wait, we good? Okay. So I started doing overtime because I felt like I can take all these tasks for myself. and I can do all these things, and I have pretty much like free hands to do them. So I'm just gonna put like my hobby time and stuff into this like super hard, and I enjoyed it a lot because again, it was like I could put like infinity hours in, and I would get like infinity returns back, like
Right.
emotionally and uh, intellectually as well. So it was very challenging because I also like I felt like I wanted to do a lot of things, and I felt like I had a lot to say about a lot of things, and I felt like most times, everybody was listening to everybody else, which was a good feeling at the time. So yeah, that's kind of the natural progression, and obviously I burned out. Like,
You mean you can't go infinity forever, and
but you feel like it.
right.
So I got into like big trouble, and I was still like reeling from my like bad like personal shit show that was like the Mexican telenovela of my life. And then like all of that kind of at one point was too much at the same time to handle, and then I just felt like I have too much kind of that I bit off that I can chew, and I need to kind of stop before I feel like I actually burn out, because I've been very, very close to a couple of times to just like completely burning out, like in the sense of I probably would need to go to a hospital with something and get a health checkup. But luckily, I've never crossed that border. And at that point, I basically said, like, okay, I'm leaving the games industry for a while because it's way too hard for me to handle like all of this. And of course, like Disco Elysium's narrative stuff
Right.
was right in my face. So there's a little bit of like tequila sunset in all of us, I think, in that sense, if we're talking like game references. So at that point, I could see myself in the mirror as I was working on the project, and it just felt like, okay, like this needs to stop, even if it's for a little while. So I just looked for other jobs, and I just found a software gig at one of the biggest, if not the biggest, like business IT company in Estonia, and it was great. And I had my own like project. I was working with a research and development team. It was like super corporate IT, but it was like you could do anything you want. Like you ask for resources and you can pretty much get it. And so it felt like super cool to work on that. And then the project got shelved.
Right.
And I'm like, super. And I had like a ridiculous salary. I could pay my sister back in like 2 months after working there. It's just like cool. And it was really, really nice. Like the job was great. And yeah, weirdly enough, like I got the job through my ex, who I had just like previously broken up with as well, but was still on like good terms on. And then after I left the job there, then the terms kind of like also went down. But yeah, so I mean, you win some, you lose some. But yeah, so when the project got shelved there, then I just went back into Disco Elysium again, and they welcomed me back with open arms.
I find, I mean, definitely not speaking from personal experience here at all, but when you've got personal life troubles going on, work, especially, I don't know if it's just in the games industry, but work can be like a great way of just like covering all of that and like pushing the resolution, kicking it down the road, while I've clearly got more important problems in front of me. This game
Yeah,
needs this, that, and the other thing, and so it's something that I don't think we are particularly well trained at. Nobody teaches us how to manage, resolving our personal issues while simultaneously having good work output in these kinds of things. And how are you with it now? Like after these extremes, have you found any balance, or is it just as bad as ever?
I mean, it's well, there's a reason why there's that one line about me in the credits profile in Death and Taxes that I'm always like broken in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
So, wait, what was the exact line? They're
So
all so
it's
it's broken in a variety of unbelievable ways.
yeah.
So, yeah, you can see where this is coming from. So, yeah, no, actually, like considering that I've had these very extreme experiences that, yeah, not a lot of people have. First of all, I kind of like it. I kind of like that I've had the chance to live wildly in that sense. I'm thankful for those experiences, but it's been shit. So I would say any sort of that kind of experience has made me stronger and more aware of myself as like a human being and how to talk to other people, how to respect myself and how to respect other people, how to love myself and how to love other people. It's been always kind of like a learning experience, and I've learned a lot about uh, well, basically learned mostly about how to exist in like subjective harmony with other people. I think that's kind of a thing, like how to not be like a stick in between someone's spokes, basically. How not to get in other people's way and let people be their best selves and do whatever they're good at. And
Right.
that goes for like professional and private relationships as well. And just because I've had these very open work environments where it's okay to like talk about how you're doing in your personal life as well. It's like, how are you feeling? And it's like, oh, something bad happened. It's like, oh, tell me about it. And then you can work through that. And especially if something like major happens and you have these people around you, then it feels nice. It feels like extended family, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these people that I've been talking to and met, just randomly across my game development like road, uh, a lot of these people end up sticking in my life, and I like having them in my life. And it's like these weird wild experiences have helped me connect with a lot of people who I necessarily wouldn't have connected with otherwise, because I'm very yeah, it's kind of like a miracle that I'm doing this kind of a free form interview with somebody, because like 10 years ago, no, nope, not happening, not ever, screw that. So it's just made me way more open as a person as well, because I might be on the spectrum. That's never been like officially confirmed, but I had two psychiatrists tell me that I might be, and I'm just like, do you want to confirm it? And I'm like,
Right.
I'm not sure what to do with that information, so I haven't. But it would make a lot of sense. So that's kind of a thing, especially if like being a little bit off kilter as a human, and then also having these wild extreme experiences. Like, I'm so glad that I've had them, because it has helped me connect a way more than it could have, I think.
If you were to break off and try solo dev again with a friend, um, do you think you would make a different type of game now? Having
Yeah,
having having this varied life experience that came afterwards.
yeah, for sure. And like one thing that kind of drives me now, especially in games, is that I want to tell a cool story. Like, no matter what I do, I just kind of like things having thought put into them and leaving something for others to discover. And it's also really cool if you can make them, laugh or cry or just, have a good time. And now I don't want to make games that are like, I've always liked games that have a lot of structure. So I'll maybe give an interesting example. So I do some hobby projects as well, and I have a lot of hobby projects in the city builder genre. So, and I have this like huge like technical stress test demo in like Unreal Engine 4 that I'm networking. Like, so I'm making a multiplayer city builder where there's 2.5 million agents simulated at the same time, where they like go to sleep, go work, produce resources, live in a house and whatever. And I'm just doing that because it's like awesome and it's systems and whatever, but it's so barren of any sort of like emotional attachment,
Right.
right? And now, and I started these kinds of projects in like 2015 and 16. And right now, I'm just thinking of like, I would really like a cool game where you could like, basically role play the Shire from Lord of the Rings, and we just have like happy fat hobbits running around and like having baking contests and like carnivals and like wizards coming in with fireworks and just watching them, have a good time and just chill out. And can be like a small village with, you can do some sim stuff, customize some hobbit holes, just having something cozy. So I've been going way more into the experience side of things now, um, having those connections with people, like, because now I also know how to make people experience things through games.
Right. I've always, it's actually funny you bring up the city builder. I've always wanted like a Sim City style game with like there's one button on your keyboard and it zooms into just this one person, this one specific person in the city, right? You have no control over them, but then you can like systemically, through adjusting the city, their existence, their life changes because of how you've built your city. And you can like there's some ways of tying in those system machines with the emotional connectivity, and like just seeing how it's a I make if I adjust public schooling, or if I adjust if I did destroy garbage welfare collection, what happens to this person's life every day.
That's like true show.
Yeah. I love that.
I would love that shit.
Yes.
Hell yeah. That sounds amazing. I would play that. I'd play that.
Yeah, I will never make that. It's way too. That's hard. That's a hard game to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. No, it's so funny because it's like you said, the games often get really sorted into these mechanical or experiential games, and it's like too far on the mechanical side and you don't feel anything when you play. It's like I'm crunching numbers, I'm managing systems, and that tickles one part of my brain in a really great way that I love. But then you go too far on the experiential side and it's like, well, why isn't this a movie? Like why aren't I just like reading this book or whatever? Like, am I even playing anything anymore? And it's really hard to strike that balance. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any like? Do you know when you're hitting that balance?
Yeah, I've definitely kind of gotten a way better idea of what kind of makes that nowadays, I think. So it's gonna sound a lot easier than it is, but I find like the trick is to use the mechanics as kind of the first stepping stone for the player. It's like imagine you're trying to cross a river, and like before the bridge you have some shallow area, and like you might have to get your feet wet. So you have some stepping stones there to make sure that you don't slip in. And then like once you kind of take that, it's like a small risk that you have to take to kind of hook the player in, give them like an interesting mechanic. Like it can be a little bit tactile, or it can be somehow like involving the players like primary like visual sense. Like somehow it might be like visually shiny, and just guide them along, get them to notice what you're doing, and then tell them like come out with a nice message of, I'm going to give you something now, and I'm going to make sure that you know what you're getting, making the player feel safe. And then you kind of elevate that, and you keep elevating that. And that's kind of how you craft a good experience is that you give them like a step-by-step way to get into it. You introduce them into your setting, into your world, into your mechanics, and you don't have to make it super deep or complex, but it needs to feel, yeah, safe. Basically, the player needs to feel that they feel comfortable enough, and that's when they start to experiment. And now that's the place where you have control as a designer. When people feel comfortable enough to experience, that's the point where you can start thinking like, if I were a player of this game, what would I be trying to do? And there's, yeah, like infinity answers to that kind of question. So you're gonna get it right with someone. You're definitely gonna get it right with for someone. Like somebody is always going to like relate to this somehow. Now the rest of the formula is like finding out how well that fits with like whoever you're trying to make the game for, like your target audience. Basically, maybe you're making the game for yourself. Maybe you're trying to say something to yourself. There's going to be people out there who are going to be similar to you as well, so they can relate somehow. And like that kind of builds and drives this balance. And the more complex you have, like of a message you have, then why not even add more complexity from the mechanics as well? And that's when things start to get super interesting. When you build complexity in terms of like the emotional or visual feedback, and also add complexity in terms of mechanics. And that's kind of where I see that a lot of experience driven games are trying to go as well. It's trying to, not do one or the other super well, but try and have one complement the other, but just in a unique like twist, basically. And I think that's kind of the main key to consider.
Right.
That was a lot.
It's developing that sort of like measured approach is something that I feel like I need to get a lot better at. Like I still, I'm 10 years in now and I'm still going almost exclusively off of my gut. It's like this
But
feels
that
right, doesn't
works.
feel right. It works, but I mean, for now, right? It doesn't. I don't think it can work forever. So it is one of these things that I love hearing other people's perspectives on, because it's something I got to get better at eventually. Before eventually I'll be wrong, and
Yeah.
and we'll have to rely on what we've learned rather than how we feel.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's kind of a thing that if you start to improve it, like having this kind of measured style of approaching things and having a little method in the chaos. I mean, it's something that when you start putting more and more time into it and putting yourself into other people's shoes, and trying to like role play as other people as well, maybe even like there's a lot of ways you could approach this, then eventually it's going to get to a place where you can do it effortlessly. And it's basically the same as going with your gut, but you're going to have a little bit of a more informed or an educated
Right.
gut feeling, right? That's kind of the thing. And it might feel like I do have like some sort of structure in my head, but even for myself it's really hard to put it into words, because most times I am going by my feeling, but my feeling is influenced by the experiences that I've had and
Right.
the skills that I have honed. So that's kind of a thing. Like if you can break it down somehow, I think that's one of the most helpful things for me, is try and break things down and then put them back together again and see how they could fit together. So like trying to figure out why somebody reacted to a specific piece of content or a specific mechanic in a certain way, and then like seeing how that maps into their personality and what I know about them. And so you're always working with like imperfect information, but you're going to start seeing some patterns. And then once you catch those patterns, that's when you get that effortless kind of gut feeling reactions to things. Like you know that, okay, I know why this doesn't feel good. I know why it feels off. I know why it doesn't feel fun. And that's like a really nice place to be, because you can always add more and more experiences on top of that. Because if you kind of can untie your brain in a way where you can deconstruct this information, then you can keep doing that and like build on top, so you will have better and better like gut calls all the time going forward.
It's funny. I think Death and Taxes is a game that must have had a solid amount of that personality mapping, in order
Yeah.
to do what it does. Because, like, for those of you who haven't seen the game, you play a Grim Reaper, and it's I guess to be incredibly reductive of it, it's a Papers Please esque. You get profiles of individuals, and you decide who lives and dies, while also getting directives from your uh, company superior, and writing profiles, and designing the balance of characters in order to affect emotional weight for different people is really tricky, especially in a game that provides you with a fair amount of freedom. It's not unlimited freedom. You choose that they live or they die, but
Mm-hmm.
that those are relatively big or heavy stakes. It can be heavy stakes for certain types of personalities, and
Yeah.
not. So I'm curious, what was your I mean, you did a lot of the programming for the game.
All of it.
All of it. uh, so I guess is what was your takeaway from the experience of working on it, and like where, from it's different talking about the thematic elements of it, which tune in
Yeah.
next week for another episode that will also be talking about Death and Taxes. But I'm still curious to hear your opinion on the adjudication of life and death.
Yeah, like sorry, one moment. Okay, here we go. Death and Taxes is like it's such a weird example of how to make a game. So the whole thing was made like by a bunch of people doing it voluntarily, like solo dev with a friend, basically, with 7 friends and all the voice actors. And the guiding message of the game became that the game is about being a grim reaper on an office job, and like that was basically the line that was supposed to bring in people.
Mm-hmm.
And that line also brought in team members onto the project, because I was brought into it as well. So it's it was very interesting in the sense of how aware everybody could be about what we were doing, but at the same time, we didn't really have a solid idea what we were doing. So it was like this very natural kind of growth of the project where everybody was putting in as much time as they could. Um, we did a revenue share agreement as well, like taking into account like how much time people put into it, and like even increased a little bit of the percentages if like when people started putting more time than they initially planned, for example. And like what was important for us was that people would just enjoy whatever the hell they're doing and let them do whatever they want, basically. And in that sense, like we all had a lot of freedom to decide stuff, and we tried to talk to everybody about different aspects of the game and get everybody's input on it, and like just have very irregular like team meetings where we would just sync up about whatever is happening. And it just kind of grew into a certain shape naturally. Like it didn't need a lot of direction. And that's only because the idea was so refined by the time that we started working on it.
Right.
And that was basically the X factor, I think, because Lene, Lene Gunnap, she came up with the idea. It's basically her creative vision, like struck throughout the entire game, and everybody just kind of went along with it. And it even affected my programming as well, because it was a very like small scope project, and it wasn't supposed to be like super complex in terms of its systems. So even the programming for the game has this kind of weird convoluted like kind of grotesque shape to it, but
Right.
it all works because it's kind of just slammed together from different parts, but they actually fit together somehow, but like very neatly. So it's very strange because like I even when I was programming some of the game mechanics there, then I was just thinking like how how is this going to look for the player? Like, should I do things in a certain way? Is this going to affect like something for the player, like in terms of like feel or visuals? And try to keep that in mind, like at every step as well. And it kind of gave me a yeah an interesting experience of making this game like kind of forming it like clay that rather than putting down bricks everywhere.
Right. From like a structural perspective, I can imagine that the project is relatively unique on the programming side because it feels like, and this is something that I love and is a pillar of Sometimes Always Monsters, my last big game, is
Yeah.
the sort of right of
Good game.
thank you, the sort of right of refusal where there's like, you've got the bar, you've got the shop. There's a lot of like aspects of the game that like aren't forced upon the player. Like, the player doesn't even have to really read the profiles. They don't have to
Exactly.
open it. They can just like, click, whatever. This is just my job. I'm here checking in, checking out. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is something that it took us a while to like. If you compare our first game, Always Sometimes Monsters, to Sometimes Always, like the linearity of the first game is actually, it's a very open game, but there's a very strong thread that runs through the middle of it that like forces you to interact with all these systems and touch on all like a lot of the content. But I didn't feel that with Death and Taxes, and I'm curious how you approached building all these elements in sort of isolation. Like, you've got the elevator to like get you to places, but other than that, there's nothing forcing you to do anything else.
Yeah. Also, one thing that you mentioned about like checking in the profiles and just like clicking
Mm,
through them, and like just I'm just a stupid office worker.
yeah.
Like that's also because when I was testing the game, I needed a way to quickly like do a click through test of like all the different parts to make sure that it works. And that's possible because I deliberately wanted this to be possible. I wanted it to like, if you wanted to, like all the papers are open neatly. If you can get into a good like click 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 rhythm, then you can just like go through them
Mm-hmm.
really quickly, and you would learn how the papers are placed, and you could really quickly like finish days. So
Mm-hmm.
even that kind of affects the experience a little bit. Just how like devs have left their mark on stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was playing it, like when I started, I read every little shred of a person's profile, and by the
Yeah.
time I got to day like 15, 16, 17, I'm like, what are the objectives? Okay, sort. You're a scientist. You're a scientist. You're a scientist. Dead, dead, dead. Right? Like, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I've got to make a choice now, really between like two or three people, and it's like, I'd look for people. If you had a mention of the simulation theory, I'd let you live. And if not, then that's it. You're gone. And
Yeah.
that was really my process. It became very mechanical for me. Like I was just like, I don't. These are passing lives. I don't care.
Yeah, and that's mostly because that's how these like different parts of the game start meshing together. Like you're given a lot of choice on how you want to do things, even though like you have such limited interactions in the world. Like you can, for example, never change your appearance, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and that means you'll never meet a certain character. So it's like all up to the player to kind of decide how much content do they want. And it's always kind of tricky and kind of painful doing that because you kind of know there's always going to be somebody who's never going to see this content.
Oh yeah.
Like you kind of have to take that damage in like mentally, and when you do, you're going to be fine. Like that's kind of the thing. Like when you come to terms with the fact like it feels kind of iffy, or it feels like why are we doing this content anyway if potentially some person is not going to see this, right? You want the person to experience all the content because it's good stuff. But I just feel like, especially in this way that we worked, like the game did like take shape in these pieces as well. First, we had like the dialogues with Fate. That was the first step. The second step was the office, the actual checking of the profiles. And we were like, damn, we should really add character customizations. Like, people really like character customization. So we just added the mirror room. And then we were like, damn, we should have some place where you could buy stuff for your character customization. And then the shop became a thing. And then like an entire character that's like very, very famous in the fandom and very beloved, Mortimer, the totally not a pirate. Right. Like, he's one of the most iconic characters in the game and my favorite, because he is just like the literal consequence of an afterthought of an afterthought of an afterthought, but ended up being like one of the most memorable parts of the game. Right. And that's kind of it's this emergent kind of design that comes from keeping stuff open and like letting yourself just do stupid ideas.
It's tough leaving the player with that self-direction, and it's something that we had to deal with as well. Because I feel like games have trained people not to look after their own sense of fun, right? They'll go into a game and expect to be told every little thing to do, and then when they're not having fun, they're like, this game sucks. It's not that I have not engaged that piece of my. We had a lot of trouble at launch because people were not enjoying the freedom that they were given and not using their own guidance, and they were just following like the same routine over and over again, which is a boring life. We ended up putting a little disclaimer at the start of the game to be like, no, like.
We were thinking about that. We were thinking about that as well. We were literally thinking like should we like have some statements about some stuff about in the game? But then we were just like, whatever. Like we will pray to the algorithm gods that people who like these types of experiences are going to buy this kind of experience, and they did. And we did have a lot of people at launch who did not get what they were expecting and did not want to explore, or felt like whatever was left there to explore felt vacuous somehow, or just like not enough or not fulfilling. And that was fine for us as well, because we knew that we were making the game for a certain type of player. Like the actual like demographic was like female identifying millennials, basically. So we were trying really hard to, try and think like a millennial while also being a millennial. So that helped quite a lot. But, there's such diversity in people's personalities, like, and then we just wanted to, hit a certain tone and keep this like the certain tone. And that, I think, helped us a lot, because it's very easy with Death and Taxes to see if you're going to like the game or not, because we wanted the player to see like the main loop of the game like pretty quickly. Like within 15 minutes of playing the game, you're gonna know exactly what's gonna go on. And you don't know if there's going to be any twists or not, and there aren't like that many big twists in the game. We didn't want to do that because it can feel jarring, and it doesn't really fit the narrative too much. There's a little bit of like, jiggery pokery, but nothing too heavy. But that was kind of how we approached the issue, is just like let go and just try and be consistent. So like try and again, like put yourself in other people's shoes and see like, would they really like this kind of thing? Are they gonna enjoy it? And kind of let it breathe as well, especially if it's like multiple people working on the same thing, like trying to design a specific part of the game. It's like you get all these ideas and then you narrow it down, and then think like, okay, I think I can see this working finally.
Yeah, it's tough. When you have to trust the player. Like,
Yeah.
that's
And we
not
had a
something easy
lot
to
of
do.
faith in the player. Like we had to. We were like we were just thinking like we were hoping so much that we're going to hit the audience that we want to like get the game out to, and we did, and it was definitely a gamble, but it was something that paid off. Like this faith that we put in the player, you know, like assuming the best from the player in terms of like how they're playing the game. That's kind of what we went for.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to. I mean, it's any bit of art requires some level of faith that you're like going to be understood or at least going to be heard or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's like, but I can see why so many games like avoid that risk. You know, it's like it's so much easier just to like try and make sure that they're having a good experience with hand holding and like good objective markers all over the place.
Yeah. And it feels so tempting to go for that, right? Because you know it's going to work.
Right.
It's like you know it's going to work up until a certain extent. And then, yeah, it's like, when do you stop? Like, where do you draw the line? I think that's like the most interesting conversations happen there. It's like, where do you draw the line?
Right. Well, I guess as we begin our wind down here, is there anything more you wanted to tell us about Death and Taxes? Oh, we're gonna have another show. Lean's coming on on next week, so we'll be talking more about Death and Taxes then. But
Yes.
yeah, are you taking a break now? Are you working on anything exciting? Are you
Yeah.
breaking
Like,
things?
we are going to have the Russian version localization of Death and Taxes coming out really soon. The translation was proofread today,
There we go.
so we're gonna have a Loka export soon and see how it works in Russian, and that's gonna be really interesting to see. Uh, but other than just like post-release Death and Taxes stuff, we are working on a new game from Placeholder Gameworks, and it's called Broken Alliance. It does not have a Steam page yet, but there will be one sometime soonish when we finish the screenshots and whatever that you need for the front page on Steam. So keep an eye out for that, and that's going to be, surprise, surprise, a Heroes of Might and Magic like game.
Hey, full circle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's going to be a fantasy turn-based adventure strategy game. But we're going to deviate really hard from the Heroes formula. So we don't want to clone it. We just want to, you know, as I said, deconstruct and put back together again.
Very fun. Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It was a good chat. And I guess I'll see you later, chat. I don't know where I'm going to send you, but everybody, have a good time making games and stuff. Goodbye.
See ya. Thank you.